everyone, welcome back to the class of literary readers. My name is Pratibha. As we are continuing our series on the history of English literature, so today we are going to talk about the next period in the history of English literature, which is the Jacobean and Caroline era. So today we are going to talk about the historical background of this period, literary features of this period, the major writers and their significant works written during this period. But before that, if you are new here, then don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so that you can never miss any notifications from this channel. So let us begin our discussion on the Jacobean and Caroline period. If we talk about the timeline of this period, then this period was started from 1603 till 1625. So this Jacobean era begins in 1603 when Elizabeth first died and James first became the king, and it ends in 1625 when King James first died. So whenever you hear Jacobean, immediately remember the reign of King James first. Second point is age of King James the First. If we talk about the word Jacobean, then the word Jacobean comes from Jacobus, the Latin form of James. So just like Elizabethan age comes from the word Elizabeth, Jacobean age comes from the word James, जिनका Latin word है Jacobus. The third point is marked transition from optimism to pessimism. So this is the most important thing. During the Elizabethan age, literature was very optimistic, full of confidence, national pride, Renaissance spirit, and England was powerful, stable and growing during that time. लेकिन जब जेम्स फर्स्ट का पीरियड स्टार्ट होता है, सिचुएशन थोड़ी चेंज हो जाती है. There is religious conflict, political tension, corruption in the court, conflict between king and the parliament. So naturally the mood of the age becomes darker. So this period marks transition from optimism to pessimism. Now let us discuss the historical background of this period. As we have already discussed that in 1603 King James the First became the king. So it was an accession of King James the First in the year 1603. Now understand something very important about King James the First, that he strongly believed in the divine rights of the king. Now what does it mean? According to him, king is appointed by God. King की authority direct God से आती है. So the king cannot be questioned by anyone, not even parliament. Now think carefully. Will parliament accept this? Of course not. Parliament also believed that they had authority, especially in matters of taxation and lawmaking. So naturally conflict started between the king and the parliament. So यहीं से political tension develop होता है. Now we have the religious conflict. At that time England was mainly Protestant. King James first himself was a Protestant, but there were many Catholics in England. So they were hoping that James would be more tolerant towards them, but that thing did not really happen. At the same time, Puritans were also not satisfied. So, what do we see? Catholics were unhappy, Puritans were unhappy, and religious tension were slowly increasing. Now comes a very important event, the gunpowder plot of 1605. Some Catholics planned to blow up the House of Lords and kill King James the First, but the plan failed. After this incident, fear and suspicion increased in the country. Catholics were treated more harshly, so the atmosphere became even more tense. And finally, the next point is James First court became known for corruption, favoritism, and extravagance. He gave too much importance to his favorites. Parliament did not like this. There were continuous disputes over money and authority. So, overall, this period was marked by religious conflict, political struggle, corruption, tension between king and the parliament. So remember, when society becomes unstable and darker, literature also becomes darker. That is why Jacobean literature reflects pessimism, corruption, and moral decay. So, this was the historical background of this period. Now, let us understand the literary characteristics of this period. So, if we talk about the literary characteristics of this period, first point is the King James Bible. The King James Bible was published in 1611. It was an authorized version of the Bible. It was translated into English during the reign of King James I. Now, why is it important? Because this translation had a great impact on English language and prose style. Then the second point is drama remains the dominant genre. So, just like the Elizabethan age, drama continues to be the most important literary form in the Jacobean age as well. Theatres were active, plays were regularly performed. But the important thing is the tone changes. Elizabethan drama was more optimistic and heroic, but in the Jacobean period, drama becomes darker and more serious. Then the next important point is tragedy becomes darker and more violent. In this period, we see more violence, revenge, corruption, moral decay. The world in these plays does not look stable. It looks disturbed and morally corrupt. Then we have growth of satire and realism. Writers start criticizing society. They expose greed, hypocrisy, and human weaknesses. Characters are not perfect heroes, they are realistic and flawed. And finally, complex psychology of characters. Now, writers focus on inner conflict. Characters show ambition, guilt, madness, and fear. So, there is more psychological depth in Jacobean drama. So, this was about the literary characteristics of this period. Now, let us talk about the Caroline Age. So, if we talk about the Caroline Age from 1625 to 1649, now the term Caroline comes from Carolus, which is the Latin form of Charles. So, the Caroline Age means the age of King Charles I. Now, in 1625, Charles I became the king after James I, and just like his father, Charles I also believed in the divine rights of kings. That means, according to him, the king is appointed by God, the king cannot be questioned, and his authority is supreme. Now, this idea was not acceptable to Parliament. So, again, we see conflict between the king and the Parliament during this period. Now, the conflict becomes more serious in this period. In fact, from 1629 to 1640, Charles ruled personal rule. So, for 11 years, he did not call Parliament. Obviously, this increased political tension. Now, another important issue is religious conflict. Charles supported royal absolutism, high Anglican church practices, but Puritans opposed him. They did not like royal interference in religion. So now we have political conflict and religious conflict. Both were happening during this period. Because of all this tension in 1642, the English Civil War started. This war was between royalists who supported the king and parliamentarians who supported parliament. Finally, in 1649, Charles I was executed. So, do you remember that in 1649, Charles I was executed. This was a very shocking event because for the first time an English king was executed publicly. So, if we summarize, the Caroline age is marked by divine right belief, conflict between king and parliament, religious opposition, English civil war, and execution of Charles I. This period is even more unstable than the previous, the Jacobean era. Now let us talk about the literary characteristics of this period. First, we have the decline of drama due to political and moral pressure. As we have seen that during the Caroline age, there was serious conflict between the king and the parliament. The political situation was unstable, and finally the English Civil War happened. Because of this instability, theatres were affected. At the same time, the Puritans were also strongly against drama. Puritans believed that theatre was immoral. So, due to both political and moral pressure, drama started declining. So, it was no longer as strong as it was in the Elizabethan or Jacobean age. Now, the second point is poetry becomes more prominent than drama. Since drama was declining, poetry became more important. Some of the most important poets during this period were John Donne, George Herbert, and Robert Herrick. And finally, we see that prose also increased, especially religious and political prose. Because of the religious and political conflicts, many pamphlets and essays were written. So, overall, in this period, drama declines, poetry becomes dominant, and religious and political prose increases. This clearly shows how literature changes according to historical conditions. So, this was about the literary characteristics of this period. Now, let us talk about the major writers of this period. The first writer is George Chapman from 1559 to 1634. Now, George Chapman is mainly known as the translator of Homer. He produced the first great English translation of Homer's works. This is very important because his translation deeply influenced later poets. Now look at his major works. First, the Iliad of Homer. He translated Homer's Iliad into English. This was a major achievement in English literary history. Second, the Odyssey of Homer. Again, this was Chapman's English translation. Through these translations, English readers could access classical Greek literature. Now, apart from translations, Chapman was also a dramatist. One of his comedies is The Blind Beggar of Alexandria in 1598. This was his first successful play. Then we have his serious plays, Busy the Ambious and The Revenge of Busy the Ambious. These are tragedies and shows intense themes in like honor, ambition, and revenge. Another important point is that Chapman also completed Marlowe's Hero and Leander after Marlowe's death. Next, we have the writer Thomas Heywood from 1574 to 1641. He was an important dramatist of this period. His most famous work is A Woman Killed with Kindness, published in the year 1603. It is a domestic tragedy, which means that it focuses on middle class family life, not kings and queens. Another important work is The English Traveller, again dealing with personal and moral issues. He also wrote an apology for actors in 1612, which is a prose work in which he defended theatres and actors. Next, we have the writer Thomas Dekker from 1572 to 1632. He is best known for his city comedies. He realistically portrayed London life and showed deep sympathy for common people. His most important works include The Shoemaker's Holiday 1599, a famous city comedy, then Old Fortunatus in 1599, then Satyromastics in 1601. This was written as a counter attack on Ben Jonson. Then we have the work The Honest Whore Part 1 came in 1604, part 2nd came in 1630. Okay, so now we are talking about the next writer, John Webster, from 1580 to 1634. John Webster was one of the greatest tragedians of the Jacobean Age. Now, what is special about Webster? He is known for writing very dark and intense tragedies. His plays show corruption, revenge, moral decay, and psychological suffering. Now, his most important work is The Duchess of Malfi. This is a famous Jacobean tragedy. It shows political corruption, cruelty, strong female character, and tragic suffering. It is one of the finest examples of dark Jacobean drama. Another important play is The White Devil, published in 1612. This play also deals with crime, revenge, corrupt society. So now we can clearly see that Webster represents the dark spirit of the Jacobean age. So, in short, John Webster is known for dark tragedies, themes of corruption and revenge, and psychological depth in his works. Now we are talking about the writer Ben Jonson from 1572 to 1637. So Ben Jonson was a major Elizabethan and early Jacobean dramatist, poet, and critic. That means he belonged to both periods, late Elizabethan and early Jacobean. Now, first, during the Elizabethan period, his important works were Every Man in His Humour in 1598, Every Man Out of His Humour in 1599. Now, during the Jacobean period, he wrote his major comedies Volpone in 1606, Epiphany or the Silent Women, The Alchemist, and Bartholomew Fair in 1614. Next, we have Thomas Middleton. He was an important Jacobean dramatist. His major works include The Changeling, written with the writer William Raleigh. It is a dark tragedy dealing with passion and moral corruption. Then we have Beware Women, again a tragic play showing manipulation and revenge. Then we have A Chaste Mad at Cheapside, published in 1613. This is a city comedy showing realistic London life. Next writer is Philip Messinger. His famous work is A New Way to Pay All Debts, published in 1633. He focused on social injustice, moral themes, and strong dramatic structure. Then we have the writer John Ford. His famous play is It's a Pity She is a Whore. This is a very dark tragedy dealing with intense emotions. Finally, we have the writer Robert Burton. His famous prose work is The Anatomy of Melancholy. It is not a drama, it is a prose work analyzing sadness, human psychology, and melancholy in a scholarly way. Next, we have the metaphysical poet John Donne from 1572 to 1631. In the Elizabethan period, he wrote love poems like The Flea, The Sun Rising, and The Benediction, forbidding mourning. In the Jacobean period, he wrote religious poetry, especially the holy sonnets like Death Be Not Proud and Batter My Heart. He also wrote prose, which is devotions upon emergent occasions. Now we are talking about the Cavalier poets. The Cavalier poets were a group of 17th century poets during the Caroline Age from 1625 to 1649. They were supporters of the King Charles I. So politically they were royalist. The word Cavalier means a supporter of the king. In literature, these poets celebrated courtly life, love, loyalty, and pleasure. They wrote elegant, smooth, and lyrical poetry. So, in short, Cavalier poets were royalist poets of Caroline age who celebrated love and courtly life. Next, I have made a list of all the writers of the Cavalier writers and their major works. So you just note them down in your copies carefully because these are very important for your exams. So make sure that you write them properly in your copies. Now let us understand about the metaphysical poets. Now, who are metaphysical poets? Metaphysical poets are a group of 17th century English poets who wrote highly intellectual and philosophical poetry. They combined emotion with logic. Their poetry is not simple and emotional like earlier love poetry. Instead, it is full of wit, argument, paradox, and unusual comparisons called conceits. For example, John Donne compares two lovers to the two legs of a compass. This is a metaphysical conceit. These poets focus on love, religion, death, soul and body, and spiritual conflict. The term metaphysical poets was first used by John Dryden and later explained clearly by the writer Samuel Johnson. So, in simple words, metaphysical poets are poets who write intellectual, philosophical, and argumentative poetry using wit and strange comparisons. Okay, so now I have made a list of metaphysical poets and their major works. So just note them down in your copies carefully because these are important for your exams. So this is the last slide in this lecture in which we will talk about the influence of this period on later writers. First, it deepened psychological realism. Later dramatists and poets focused more on inner conflict, guilt, and moral confusion. This helped in shaping modern tragedy. Second point is it shaped later tragedies. The dark vision and revenge themes of the Jacobean Age influenced Restoration drama and later tragic tradition. Third, it established metaphysical poetry. The intellectual style started by John Donne continued in the Caroline Age and influenced many later poets. Fourth is it influenced major poets like John Milton. They inherited the seriousness, religious intensity, and tragic vision of this period. Fifth point is it refined the lyric tradition. Cavalier poetry later influenced Restoration and Augustan poets like Dryden and Pope. Finally, it had a strong critical impact. The metaphysical poets were later discussed by Samuel Johnson and re-evaluated by T.S. Eliot, which shaped modern literary criticism. So, overall, this period had a strong and lasting influence on later English literature. So, that's all for today. If you have any query, you can post your comments in the comment section down below. I will meet soon in the next video. Till then, keep loving and keep watching Literary Readers.